July 1944. The Texas sun rose like a furnace above a horizon of red dust and dry mesquite. A gray military bus rattled down the road toward a fenced compound outside the small town of Harmony Creek. Inside sat 30 German women, soldiers, nurses and clerks, captured in North Africa and shipped across the ocean. Their khaki uniforms had been replaced with plain work dresses stamped POW. The windows were cracked open, but the air that came through was thick with heat. At the very back sat Elsa Keller, 26 years old, a sergeant in the German Medical Corps. Her posture was straight, her chin lifted, in the habit of someone who refused to bow even in defeat. The others whispered or stared at the floor, but Elsa kept her eyes on the dusty fields rolling past, fields that looked nothing like the ruins she'd left behind. In Germany, the air had smelled of smoke and metal. Here, it smelled of sun-baked earth and something sweet, like corn. The guard riding shotgun was a young American named Corporal Ray Hughes. He kept glancing back at the women, half curious, half cautious. When one of them asked where they were going, he said, "Camp Harmony. You'll be safe there. Work, food, pay. No one's gonna hurt you." "Safe," one woman muttered in German. "From whom?" Elsa translated softly. "He means from the war." The bus lurched to a stop at a gate flanked by 2 armed sentries. A sign read, U.S. Army Prisoner of War, Camp Number 216, Harmony Creek, Texas. Beyond it stretched acres of farmland, low barracks, and the shimmer of heat over open pasture. Horses grazed near a corral, their tails flicking lazily at flies. The scene looked too calm to be a prison. When the women stepped down, the heat hit them like a wall. The ground felt soft, almost forgiving. A tall officer approached, hat tucked under his arm. "Ladies," he began, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Captain Whitaker. You'll be housed here and assigned to farm labor. You'll be treated fairly if you work fairly." A few women nodded. Others stared in silence. Elsa met his eyes, searching for cruelty and finding only fatigue. Whitaker continued. "There's a mess hall across the yard. Lunch will be served shortly. Welcome to Texas." He turned away before anyone could reply. As they were led toward the barracks, a smell drifted from the kitchen. Smoky meat, something baked, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. After weeks of watery soup and stale bread on the ship, the scent alone made stomachs tighten with hope and suspicion. Inside the mess hall, ceiling fans creaked overhead. Wooden tables lined the floor. American cooks, sleeves rolled up, moved quickly behind the counter. One of them, a broad-shouldered woman named Martha Lee, wiped her hands on an apron that read, Harmony Canteen. "Line up, girls," she said briskly, as if addressing farm hands instead of prisoners. "Grab a tray and keep it moving." Elsa took a tray and watched as food was spooned onto her plate. Beans, collard greens, and a square of something golden brown. It smelled buttery and strange. Martha saw her hesitation. "That there's cornbread," she said. "Made fresh this morning." "Don't look at me like that. It won't bite you." The women exchanged amused glances. One whispered in German, "Bread from corn? Americans will eat anything." Laughter rippled through the line. Elsa didn't laugh, but a corner of her mouth twitched. They sat together at a long table. The first bites of beans and greens were cautious. The cornbread, though, sat untouched. Finally, one of the younger women, Greta, poked hers with a fork. "It smells sweet," she said. "Bread should not smell sweet." Elsa broke a small piece, more to end the debate than from curiosity. It was warm and crumbly, not heavy like German rye. She took a bite, expecting blandness, and stopped. The taste was buttery, soft, faintly sweet, melting on her tongue. She blinked. "Well?" Greta asked. Elsa swallowed slowly. "It's different." Then she added, half smiling, "Maybe the Americans aren't hopeless after all." The women laughed again, lighter this time. Across the room, Martha watched them with a knowing grin. "They'll come around," she muttered to a young helper. "Nobody stays mad after cornbread." After lunch, the prisoners were shown their quarters, wooden bunks, thin mattresses, open windows. Outside, fields stretched for miles, dotted with cotton plants and windmills. It didn't look like captivity. It looked like work waiting to happen. That afternoon, Captain Whitaker called Elsa into his office. "Sergeant Keller, right?" he asked, scanning her file. "You were Medical Corps." "Yes, sir." Her English was careful but steady. "We've got a shortage of nurses at the base clinic." "You'll help there. Non-combat duties only." "Understood." "Yes, Captain." He hesitated, studying her. "You're different from the others." "You don't look broken." Elsa met his gaze. "I was trained to heal, not to hate." Whitaker gave a small nod. "That'll do." As she left, the sound of laughter drifted from outside, the American cooks cleaning up after lunch. Martha Lee's voice carried through the screen door. "You see those gals? Thought my cornbread was poison. Now they're asking for seconds." Elsa smiled faintly as she stepped into the sunlight. She wouldn't admit it aloud, but the taste of that cornbread still lingered, soft, warm, and strangely comforting. It was the first time in years that food had tasted like peace. That night, she wrote in the small notebook she kept hidden under her pillow. First day in America. Heat unbearable. People polite, eyes watchful. Cornbread, sweet, strange, impossible not to finish. I think they are trying to make us forget we are prisoners. Maybe that is their strength. She closed the notebook and lay back, listening to the hum of crickets outside. The stars looked bigger here. For the first time since the war began, Elsa Keller fell asleep without hearing bombs. The next morning began before sunrise. The bell in the yard clanged like an old cowbell, sharp and impatient. Elsa sat up, brushed the dust from her sleeves, and tied her hair in a neat knot. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of dew and distant cattle. When the women lined up for roll call, the guards stood back, rifles slung but pointed at no one. They looked tired rather than threatening. Captain Whitaker read a short list of names and work assignments, his voice firm but without anger. "Sergeant Elsa Keller," he said. "Clinic duty. Report to Dr. Parker after breakfast." A few women glanced at her with envy. Working indoors was a privilege. Elsa only nodded. Inside, she felt nervous. She'd treated soldiers before, but never her captors. Breakfast was simple. Porridge, coffee, and yes, another square of cornbread. The women smiled at each other now, less suspicious, more curious. Even Greta, who'd mocked the bread yesterday, asked Martha Lee for a second piece. "You like it now, huh?" Martha teased. Greta blushed. "It tastes like sunshine," Martha chuckled. "That's Texas for you." Elsa carried her tray to the corner and ate quietly. The cornbread tasted even better warm from the oven. Somehow it softened the edges of fear. After breakfast, she crossed the yard to a small wooden building with a red cross painted on the door. Inside, Dr. Parker was organizing supplies, bandages, iodine, aspirin, the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with dust. He was middle-aged with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "So you're my new nurse," he said, wiping his hands. "Whitaker says you were good at your job." Elsa nodded. "Yes, doctor. I worked in field hospitals. Then you'll do fine here. We treat minor injuries, snake bites, blisters, heat exhaustion. The soldiers come in, we patch them up, send them back out." He handed her a clean apron. "You'll assist and keep records. The language might trip you up, but medicine's the same everywhere." By noon, she'd cleaned wounds, taken temperatures, and prepared salves for sunburned guards who looked embarrassed to need help from a Nazi nurse. But Parker's quiet trust made it bearable. One young soldier, Private Hughes, the same guard from the bus, sat on a cot nursing a twisted ankle. When Elsa approached with a bandage, he hesitated. "You really know what you're doing?" he asked. She looked up calmly. "If I didn't, you'd limp forever." He snorted, then laughed despite himself. "Fair enough." She worked quickly, wrapping the ankle, her hands steady. "You were on the bus," she said. "You said we'd be safe." "I meant it," he replied. "This camp ain't perfect, but it's fair. Captain Whitaker makes sure of that." When she finished, he stood, testing his foot. "Guess you Germans aren't all bad," he said. "Guess you Americans aren't all arrogant," she replied. They both smiled. The ice was breaking, grain by grain. That evening, Elsa returned to the barracks tired but strangely light-hearted. The other women were mending clothes or writing letters. Greta was sketching in a notebook, drawing horses she'd seen beyond the fence. You look happy, Greta said without looking up. I worked in the clinic today, Elsa answered. With the Americans? Yes, they bleed the same as us, Greta smirked. And do they eat that sweet bread every day? Elsa laughed softly. Every day, and I think I'm starting to like it. Outside, the sky blazed orange as the sun dropped behind the hills. The camp loudspeaker crackled to life, playing a slow country tune from a radio station in town. The melody drifted across the yard, soft and melancholy. Some of the women paused to listen. It was strange, Elsa thought. Just a few days ago, they'd been enemies. Now they shared food, air, music. It didn't erase the past, but it dulled the sharpest edges. Later that week, Captain Whitaker called a meeting with all the female prisoners. We're starting farm details tomorrow, he announced. You'll help pick cotton and tend crops for the Army supply contracts. It's hard work, but you'll be paid and fed. Anyone refusing will lose privileges. No one refused. Anything was better than sitting behind fences doing nothing. After the meeting, Whitaker caught Elsa's arm. Dr. Parker says you're a quick learner. You'll oversee first aid on the field crews. Yes, sir. Good. And Keller, thank you for keeping things calm. She inclined her head. Respect works both ways, Captain. He almost smiled. You remind me of my sister. Stubborn as a mule. I'll take that as a compliment. That night, the women prepared for the new duty. They cut their dresses shorter for easier work, tied scarves around their hair. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Greta whispered, Maybe they'll let us near the horses. Maybe, Elsa said, but keep your head down. Freedom starts with small trust. Before lights out, she took out her notebook and wrote, Americans, strange people. They smile even when tired. Their music sounds like sadness that refuses to give up. I think I understand them a little now. She closed the book and blew out the candle. The night outside was vast and full of crickets. Somewhere beyond the fence, she could almost smell corn baking again. It no longer smelled foreign. It smelled like possibility. The morning the women were sent to the cotton fields began with thunder. Not the loud, crashing kind, but the deep, rolling rumble that warned of heat and storms. Elsa stood in line with the others near the gate, wearing an oversized denim shirt and work pants that hung loose on her frame. A red scarf held her hair back, and the Texas wind tugged at its ends. Corporal Ray Hughes checked the list. Keller, medical lead, he said, handing her a small canvas bag. Inside were bandages, iodine, and a battered tin of aspirin. Dr. Parker says you're in charge of patching folks up if anything happens. Try not to let anyone lose a finger. I'll do my best, Elsa answered evenly. The younger women behind her snickered. To them, the idea of a German prisoner acting like a nurse for American soldiers felt strange, almost absurd. But Elsa ignored it. Pride had already taken too much from her life. A military truck rattled to life, and they climbed aboard. The dirt road wound through endless plains dotted with mesquite trees. Rain clouds moved slowly across the horizon, heavy and gray, while sunlight burned through in golden strips. Texas looked like a painting, wild, harsh, and somehow forgiving. At the farm, locals waited with guarded eyes. Old men in overalls leaned on fence posts. Their wives stood on porches, watching as the prisoners were unloaded. One woman whispered loud enough for Elsa to hear. Those are Hitler's girls working our fields. Lord help us. Elsa pretended not to notice, but the words cut. She had expected anger. What she hadn't expected was the shame that came with it. The foreman, a thin man named Earl Whitby, met them with a frown. I don't care what flag you saluted, he said. Out here we pick fast and careful. You drop a bowl, you pick it up. You talk back, you go hungry. Understood? Yes, sir, Elsa said before anyone else could answer. Earl looked her up and down, surprised at her steadiness. Then he nodded once. Good, start at that far row. The day stretched hot and endless. By noon, sweat soaked through Elsa's shirt, and her hands burned from the rough cotton stems. The younger prisoners complained in low voices. Slavery, one muttered. Elsa shook her head. No, slaves have no pay and no hope. We have both. Still, the work was brutal. The sun punished everything it touched. When the first girl fainted, Elsa dropped her basket and ran to help. She shaded the girl's face with her scarf, gave her water, and checked her pulse. Heat exhaustion? she told Ray Hughes, who hurried over. She'll live, but she needs rest. Ray wiped his forehead. You're something else, Keller. Most folks would have stepped right over her. Elsa met his eyes. In my country, we stepped over too many. They moved the girl to the truck's shade, and the work resumed. By evening, the air had changed, thicker, darker. A storm was coming fast. Earl looked up at the sky and swore. Lightning will set the barns on fire if it hits the dry grass. We need those bales moved inside, now. Everyone rushed to help. Even the guards joined in, rolling the heavy cotton bales toward the shelter. Rain began to fall in fat, hard drops. Thunder cracked overhead. Elsa's hand slipped on the wet rope, but she pulled with everything she had. The wind howled through the open fields, flattening the grass. Suddenly, a shout. Horse loose! A brown mare broke free from the corral, terrified by the storm. It bolted toward the fence where the younger prisoners stood frozen. The rope whipped loose, snapping dangerously near their legs. Before anyone could move, Elsa ran forward. She caught the rope with both hands, digging her boots into the mud. The horse reared, eyes wide with panic. Rain pelted her face, blinding her. For a heartbeat, the world was thunder, mud, and raw power. Let it go, Ray shouted. But she didn't. She held on until her arms screamed, speaking softly in German under the noise. Ruhig, Mädchen. Ruhig. Easy, girl. Slowly the horse stilled, breathing hard. Elsa stepped closer, stroking its neck until the trembling stopped. Then she tied the rope to the fence post and backed away, soaked and shaking. When she turned, everyone, guards, prisoners, locals, was staring. Ray Hughes broke the silence first. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Captain Whitaker, who had arrived in a jeep just in time to see the scene, looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect. You could have been killed, he said later, as she sat on the steps of the barn, wringing water from her scarf. Elsa shrugged. So could the horse. He let out a slow breath. Most folks here don't risk their necks for animals, much less prisoners. You just earned yourself some goodwill, Sergeant. I didn't do it for that, she said simply. I did it because fear shouldn't win every time. The storm passed as quickly as it had come. By sunset, the clouds tore open to reveal a sky washed clean. The air smelled of rain and wet earth. The women sat by the fence exhausted but alive. Some laughed quietly, others just stared at the fading light. Martha Lee's truck arrived from the camp carrying supper, beans, coffee, and trays of warm cornbread wrapped in cloth. She climbed down, hands on her hips. Figured you'd all need something sweet after near getting struck by lightning, she said. The women gathered around, half-starved. Martha passed out the food, shaking her head. Y'all looked at me funny that first day. Now you'd sell your souls for my cornbread. Greta, her face streaked with mud, laughed. Maybe just half a soul. Elsa took her piece and broke it in two, steam rising in the cooling air. It smelled of butter and smoke and home, though she no longer knew what that word meant. She handed half to Ray without thinking. He hesitated, then accepted. Guess we're even, he said. For what? She asked. For me saying you couldn't handle yourself out here. Elsa smiled faintly. Apology accepted. They ate in silence, watching lightning flicker far away. The camp lights glowed soft against the dark sky. Somewhere behind them, the rescued mare whinnied, safe again in her stall. That night, Elsa wrote in her notebook by candlelight, Storm today. Work hard, hands bleeding. Saved a horse, saved a little of myself. Captain Whitaker called me brave. Strange word. I only did what I was taught, to protect life. Maybe that is bravery after all. She closed the book and listened to the crickets. The wind through the slats carried the faintest smell of cornbread, still warm in the kitchen down the hill. It had become the scent of something she could not name yet, something close to belonging. A month had passed since the storm. The fields around Camp Harmony glowed pale gold under the midsummer sun, and the talk among guards and locals had begun to change. They still called the prisoners the German women, but their voices no longer carried hatred, only cautious curiosity. Elsa had become a quiet legend after saving the frightened mare. Some of the townspeople even came to the fence on Sundays to watch her work, whispering that she handled animals better than most cowhands. But respect in wartime was fragile. One rumor could shatter it. That morning, Captain Whitaker looked grim as he strode into the clinic. "Something's gone wrong," he said. "Half the guards at the supply depot are sick. Fever, vomiting, rash. Doc Parker thinks it's contaminated food. I want you to help." Elsa washed her hands, tied on her apron, and nodded. "Yes, Captain." They reached the depot at noon. The heat inside the warehouse was suffocating, the air heavy with the smell of spoiled cornmeal and sweat. Soldiers lay on cots between stacked crates, faces pale, shirts soaked through. Dr. Parker moved from one to another, barking orders. "Get water boiling! Disinfect everything!" Elsa went straight to work, checking pulses, mixing saline, cooling foreheads. She noticed the same thing in every patient, the smell of moldy grain on their breath. "Captain," she said quietly, "the cornmeal's been damp." "Fungal poisoning," Whitaker frowned. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've seen it before in Africa. We need charcoal, milk, rest. No more cornmeal rations until it's burned." Word spread fast. By evening, 30 men had been treated, and only one was still in danger. The doctor's hands shook from exhaustion. "You saved them, Keller," he said finally. "If we'd waited till morning, we'd have lost half the unit. But not everyone saw it that way." The next day, Earl Whitby, the farm foreman, stormed into the camp office. He slammed a handful of charred cornmeal on the desk. "This is sabotage," he growled. "That woman said burn the food, now half my livestock feed's gone. Maybe she poisoned it herself." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Careful what you're suggesting," Earl spat on the floor. "Careful hell. You think a Nazi nurse just wants to help us out of kindness?" Outside, Elsa was tending to the sick when 2 MPs approached. "Captain wants to see you," one said. His tone was different, colder. In the office, Whitaker's face was unreadable. "Sit down, Keller." She did. "Whitby claims you tampered with the cornmeal shipments." Her pulse quickened. "That's not true. The sacks were already spoiled." He studied her, silent. Finally, he said, "I don't believe you'd poison anyone, but I have to check. Until we're sure, you'll stay in the isolation quarters." For the first time in months, Elsa felt the sting of being a prisoner again. All her work, all her care, it vanished beneath suspicion. That night, she sat alone in a small wooden room lit by a single bulb. Through the thin wall, she heard distant thunder. It sounded like laughter from ghosts she thought she'd left across the ocean, but fear couldn't silence her resolve. She opened her notebook and wrote, her handwriting steady even as her heart broke. "They doubt me again. Perhaps they must. Trust is heavy for those who have lost it too often. Still, truth will stand when anger falls." Hours later, footsteps approached. The door creaked open and Ray Hughes slipped inside, a flashlight in hand. "They shouldn't have locked you up," he whispered. "Captain's just covering himself till the lab boys in Amarillo check the grain." Elsa looked up. "You believe me?" He nodded. "You've got steadier hands than half our medics. I've seen what poison looks like. It ain't you." He set a folded napkin on the table. Inside was a piece of cornbread. "Martha told me you hadn't eaten." Elsa stared at it for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Even in prison there's cornbread," she said softly. He grinned. "That's Texas for you." When he left, she ate the bread slowly. It tasted exactly as it always did, sweet, warm, forgiving. She decided then that no accusation would steal that small piece of peace she had found. 2 days later, the report came back from Amarillo. The grain had been contaminated by floodwater weeks earlier, before it ever reached the camp. Whitby was forced to apologize, red-faced and furious. Whitaker met Elsa outside the clinic holding the paper. "You were right," he said simply. "You saved them all." She nodded once. "True stands, Captain." He looked almost ashamed. "You didn't deserve suspicion. This camp owes you?" Elsa glanced at the field where new cotton sprouted after the rain. "No one owes me anything," she said. "Just let me keep working." That evening, when the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, Martha Lee gathered everyone near the mess hall. She held up a tray piled high with steaming cornbread. "To the woman who kept us alive," she said loudly. "May she never go hungry in Texas." The crowd, guards, prisoners, even Earl Whitby, laughed and clapped. Someone started a song on a harmonica. For the first time, Elsa didn't stand apart. She took a piece of cornbread, broke it in half, and shared it with Greta beside her. As the last light faded, she thought of home, of all the things war had taken, and of this small, strange land that had given something back. Word moved through Camp Harmony the way winds slid across the prairie, soft at first, then everywhere. Someone at the radio shack caught it. Then a truck driver brought a newspaper. Then Martha Lee pinned a headline to the mess hall bulletin board with a spoon. Germany surrenders. The yard went quiet in a way Elsa had never heard before. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't grief. It was the long-held breath of people who had forgotten how to exhale. Captain Whitaker stood on a crate outside the barracks that evening, hat in hand. "Ladies," he said, using the word more gently than usual, "the war in Europe has ended. There will be a process for repatriation. It'll take time, weeks, maybe months, but the Red Cross will coordinate transport. Until then, we carry on. Work, food, pay. No changes to rules. You'll be kept safe." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some women cried openly. Others stared at the ground as if afraid hope might be a trick. Greta clutched Elsa's sleeve. "Home," she whispered. "We can go home." Home, Elsa thought. A word with two halves now. One half was broken streets and missing faces. The other was a Texas sky and the smell of cornbread in the evening air. After roll call, Whitaker asked Elsa to step into his office. The room was warm, lit by a small desk lamp that made the dust in the air look like snow. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, nodding toward the clinic. "Doc says the men are recovering. If not for you." "They would have in time," Elsa said, though she knew the truth was harsher. Whitaker folded his arms. "Listen, repatriation will come. Some may want to leave as soon as the gate opens, but there are other paths. A few ranchers have asked whether certain prisoners could apply for extended labor permits. Legal, supervised, paid. It's not common for women, but this is a strange year." He held her gaze. "If you wanted to stay and work for a season, maybe longer, I'd recommend you. You've earned that right." The room ticked with the sound of the wall clock. Elsa thought of her mother, if she still lived, of her brother, if he still breathed. She thought of the horse that had trusted her hands, of the men she had kept from dying in a warehouse that smelled of ruined grain. "I don't know," she said at last. "I don't know where I belong yet." "That's fair," Whitaker said. "You don't have to know tonight." When she stepped back into the yard, the air felt different. The guards' shoulders were looser. A few even laughed. In the mess hall, Martha stood behind trays of beans and greens like a captain on a ship reaching shore. "You read that headline?" Martha said as Elsa reached the counter. "I did. Feels like waking up after a bad fever. You look out the window and the world's still there." Martha slid a warm square of cornbread onto Elsa's plate. "One way or another, you'll find your window." That week, letters began to arrive, thin, trembling pages from across the sea. Most were bad news written kindly. Homes burnt, fathers gone, brothers missing, food lines long as roads. Elsa's name was called 3 mornings in a row with no letter to answer to it. On the 4th, one came. The address was smudged. The writing was not her mother's. "Fräulein Keller, we believe your mother was evacuated during the winter and may be in a settlement outside Leipzig. We don't know more. If you return, register with the aid station at the Eastern Rail Hub. Pastor W." She read it twice, then folded it exactly along the lines and placed it in her notebook. It wasn't comfort. It was direction. A thin string in a dark wood. Work did not stop while the future gathered itself. The fields needed hoeing. The clinic needed hands. Ray Hughes limped in one afternoon with a nail through his boot. Elsa coaxed the leather open and drew the rusty shard from his heel. "You know," he said, jaw clenched, "when the paper came this morning, I figured you'd be grinning. But you look like a woman who lost something." "Perhaps I did," she said, dabbing iodine. "War gave me a cage. Peace gives me a crossroads." He nodded, wincing as she wrapped his foot. "Crossroads are harder. No one to blame for the wrong turn but yourself." Outside the wire, town talk grew loud again. Some folks wanted the prisoners shipped out yesterday. Others argued they'd saved the spring harvest and deserved decent treatment until boats sailed. Earl Whitby, caught between anger and pride, kept his head down and his mouth mostly shut. When he did speak, it was gruff, embarrassed thanks directed at no one in particular. Sunday brought a surprise. The Harmony Creek Church held a picnic near the river and, with Whitaker's approval, invited a small group from the women's compound under guard. Not as guests, perhaps, but not as enemies either. Elsa, Greta, and 3 others walked down the dirt road with Ray and 2 MPs trailing behind. People stared. Children stared hardest, the way children always do, open-faced and unarmed. On the lawn, long tables sagged with food, fried chicken, sliced tomatoes, jars of pickles, pies glistening under wax paper. At the end of one table, there were 3 pans of cornbread, one pale and buttery, one dark and crisp at the edges, one studded with jalapenos that made Greta giggle and fan her mouth after a bite. "Not a war ration in sight," Martha announced, hands on hips. If peace had a smell, this would be it. A few men in Sunday hats watched Elsa carefully. One stepped forward, lean, weathered silver at his temples. "Ma'am," he said, voice stiff with the effort of courtesy. "My boy was at Bastogne. He wrote me once that a German nurse sewed him up after he got shelled. Said she had hands like a mother's. If that was you, well, I'm not saying we're friends. But I can say thank you. It may have been me," Elsa said. "It may have been another woman with hands and a heart. We have many of both." She offered her hand. He took it after a beat, and the handshake held more than pressure. It held years of loss stretching a little thinner. The pastor who'd signed Elsa's letter found her under a cottonwood tree near the river. He was younger than she'd pictured, with round glasses and a sunburned nose. "Miss Keller?" he asked. "Yes. I wrote to you about your mother. I'm trying to match names and faces through the aid network. It's slow work." "Slow is still forward," she said. He smiled, a little surprised. "That's a good way to put it." A child of 6 wandered up, holding a slice of the jalapeno cornbread with both hands. "It's spicy," the girl announced to no one. "But I like it." Elsa crouched to the child's height. "Brave," she said, and the girl beamed at a word that felt like a medal. The picnic might have ended softly if not for the accident. Near sundown, a boy slipping along the riverbank lost his footing and dropped into the current. His mother screamed. Men ran, boots sliding on wet clay. The water pulled the boy under a tangle of roots near the bend. Elsa was moving before her name could be called. She kicked off her shoes, stripped her work dress to the slip, and waded in up to her waist. "Rope!" she shouted. "And someone cut those roots!" Ray tore his belt free and tossed one end. She wrapped it around her forearm and plunged forward, feeling with her hands where her eyes could not see. The river was brown and stronger than it looked. Twice it tugged her off her feet. Twice she planted herself and pushed back. Her fingers found cotton shirts, small and slick with mud. She slid an arm under the boy's ribs, freed his trapped leg with a twist that left her knuckles bleeding, and hauled him against her chest. "Now!" she called. Ray and 2 farmers pulled hard. They came up together, boy coughing, Elsa shaking, the world roaring back into sound. On the bank, someone threw a blanket around the child. Elsa pressed on his sternum, tilted his chin, breathed for him. A beat. Another. The boy vomited river water and rasped a thin cry. His mother fell to her knees, keening with relief. Ray crouched beside Elsa, water running off his hat brim. "You really don't like an easy day, do you?" She looked at him, hair plastered to her cheek, and laughed. A short, astonished sound. "I like days that end with breathing." By the time they walked back to camp, dusk had inked the fields blue. At the gate, Whitaker waited, expression caught between command and pride. "The pastor radioed," he said. "Told me what you did." He paused. "They want to bring a thank you basket tomorrow. I told them we accept pies, not speeches." "Pies are easier to digest," Elsa said, teeth chattering now that the work was over. Martha appeared with a towel and a mug that steamed. "Hot milk with honey," she said. "You earned something sweeter than coffee." Elsa wrapped her hands around the mug. The heat climbed into her fingers, then into her chest, settling what the river had shaken loose. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from the pressure of choice. On the table beside her bunk lay two objects: the pastor's letter about her mother and a neatly folded form Whitaker had placed in her hand after the gate. Application for civilian agricultural labor permit, extended. Both were thin. Both were heavy. Greta rolled over on the bunk above and peered down. "You will go home," she said, more hope than certainty. "Yes, I will go somewhere true," Elsa said. "I must decide which truth needs me more." In the dark, the camp breathed its slow summer breath. Somewhere, a horse stamped in its stall and settled. Far off, a whip-poor-will called, patient as a clock. Morning brought pies and newspapers and a kind of truce. The boy's mother came to the fence with a basket and words that snagged in her throat. "I didn't think I could thank you," she said at last. "But I can." She pressed the handle through the wire. "God keep you wherever you go." The summer heat never fully left Texas, even as September crept closer. The air shimmered above the fields, and the smell of hay and smoke hung over the camp. Life moved quietly again, too quietly for Elsa's taste. Rumors of her decision ran through the barracks before dawn. Some whispered she had chosen to stay, others that she planned to go home. Even Greta wouldn't ask outright. "You'll tell us when it's time," she said softly, and Elsa nodded. Captain Whitaker's respect for her had become open now. When he passed her in the yard, he greeted her like an equal. Ray still limped slightly, but worked beside her at the clinic, laughing that she'd ruined him for army hospitals because no one else wrapped a foot with the patience of a saint. Yet beneath the quiet, tension coiled. The town was divided. The same newspaper that printed Germany surrenders now carried headlines about veterans returning home. Men who had fought in Europe found it hard to see German prisoners still working, eating, and laughing under Texas skies. One evening, as Elsa closed the clinic shutters, a stone hit the window frame. She flinched. Outside the fence, 3 teenage boys, sons of local farmers, shouted something she couldn't catch. Then louder, "Go back where you came from!" The guards on duty chased them off, but the damage was done. That night, she sat outside her bunkhouse with a candle stub burning low. Greta joined her quietly. "Why do they hate what's already lost?" Greta asked. Elsa sighed. "Because hate doesn't know when a war ends." 2 days later, it found them again, this time as fire. It started near the storage shed after dark. By the time the sentry spotted the smoke, dry wind had turned it into a sheet of flame running along the fence line. The alarm bell clanged through the camp. Prisoners stumbled from the barracks, coughing, shouting, "Water buckets! Move!" Whitaker's voice cut through the chaos. "Hughes, get the generator running!" Elsa pulled her scarf over her mouth and ran toward the clinic. Inside were boxes of bandages, morphine, and supplies that couldn't be lost. She grabbed what she could and tossed it into the yard. Greta and 2 others formed a line, passing buckets from the well. The fire leapt from the shed to the stables, where the rescued mare kicked and screamed in terror. Elsa didn't think. She moved. She slipped through the smoke and found the rope latch with shaking hands. The horse's eyes rolled white. "Easy, Mädchen," she whispered, the same words as before. "Easy." Someone grabbed her arm. It was Ray, face streaked with soot. "You'll die in here! Then we die helping," she shouted back. Together they cut the ropes and slapped the horses into the open field. Flames licked at the rafters. When the last stall was empty, a beam cracked above them. Ray shoved her through the doorway as it fell, splintering where she'd been standing seconds earlier. Outside, the night roared orange. Guards and prisoners worked side by side, passing buckets, stamping sparks, dragging smoldering boards away from the barracks. Whitaker barked orders hoarse but steady, and no one disobeyed. By dawn, the fire was out. Half the stables were gone, but no lives lost. The mare grazed calmly in the pasture as if nothing had happened. Whitaker stood amid the ashes, hat in his hands. "It wasn't an accident," he said. "Gasoline by the fence. Someone threw a bottle over." He looked at the women, at Elsa's soot-blackened face. "We'll find who did it. I swear." Elsa shook her head. "No, find peace first. Then justice will come." That morning, as they cleaned the ruins, townsfolk began to arrive. Ashamed faces, buckets, shovels, pies wrapped in towels. The pastor led them. "We can't undo last night," he said quietly, "but we can stand where we should have stood sooner." Martha handed Elsa a fresh apron and a plate wrapped in cloth. "Cornbread," she said. "Still warm?" Elsa broke it in half and gave the rest to a young farmhand who'd been too scared to meet her eyes. "Eat," she said. "We rebuild with full stomachs." The boy took it, tears streaking the soot on his cheeks. By sunset, the fence was mended, the horses fed, and the clinic back in order. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, but it was the clean smoke of work finished, not the foul kind that came from hate. That night, Whitaker stood before the assembled camp. "An attack was meant to divide us," he said. "Instead, it showed what we are when we forget sides. Remember this when the gates open." Elsa stood at the back, hands folded, eyes on the dark horizon. She knew her decision now. The world had given her its test and its answer. When Whitaker caught her glance, she nodded once. Tomorrow she would sign the paper that would send her home. He returned the nod, slow, proud and sad all at once. In the mess hall later, Martha served cornbread again, but this time with real butter, brought from town. She pressed the pan into Elsa's hands. "For the road," she said. "So you don't forget Texas," Elsa smiled through tears. "How could I?" Outside, the stars burned steady over the quiet camp. The war was over, the fire was out, and for the first time since the world had torn itself apart, Elsa Keller felt whole. The mornings after the fire carried a strange calm. The sky over Harmony Creek looked cleaner, as if smoke had scrubbed it. The grass by the fence grew black-tipped where the flames had licked it, but new shoots already pushed through. Elsa spent her last week in Texas quietly. She worked in the clinic by habit, mending scratches, mixing ointments, and teaching Greta the English words for pulse, bandage, and breathe. The camp felt different now, softer somehow, because the guards had stopped guarding and started watching. The way one watches neighbors moving away. Captain Whitaker had arranged her papers. They lay in a folder on his desk, repatriation orders stamped with the date, a small packet of ration coupons for the trip, and a folded American flag pin he had added himself. "You don't have to wear it," he said when he handed it to her. "But you earned it." Elsa turned the tiny medal between her fingers. "I will keep it," she said, "until my country can stand tall again. Then I'll give it back." Whitaker smiled faintly. "Then I'll expect a visit." Ray Hughes stopped by the clinic that afternoon, boot-heeled enough for one last ride. He leaned in the doorway, hat tilted low. "So, this is it?" "Yes," Elsa said. "Tomorrow I leave for Galveston. You'll take the ship back across?" "Yes. They say it'll be 2 weeks at sea." Ray scratched the back of his neck. "I ain't good at goodbyes, Keller. But I figured I'd tell you. You changed the way I see folks. Not every fight's won with a rifle." She smiled softly. "And not every wound bleeds," he nodded. "If you ever miss dust, heat, and bad coffee, Texas will still be here." That night, Elsa sat outside the bunkhouse one last time with Greta and Martha. The crickets sang, and a breeze carried the smell of baked cornbread cooling on the kitchen window. "You'll write?" Greta asked. "If the mail finds me," Elsa said. Martha handed her a wrapped loaf. "For the voyage. It won't keep, but the memory will." They sat in silence for a while, the way people do when words are too small for the moment. Before dawn, the trucks lined up by the gate. The women climbed aboard, their bags light, their hearts heavy. Elsa carried the folder under her arm and the loaf in her lap. Whitaker stood beside the gate with Ray and Martha. The captain raised his hand. "Safe travels, Sergeant Keller," she saluted. Not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as someone finally seen. The truck rumbled forward. The camp shrank behind them until it was only a pattern of fences and rooftops fading into the golden grass. Elsa kept her eyes on the horizon until it blurred. At the port, hundreds waited. Soldiers going home, refugees, children clutching papers. The ocean stretched blue and endless, the first she had seen since the crossing that brought her here. When the ship's whistle sounded, Elsa felt the wind lift her hair and thought of every mile between this shore and the one waiting beyond. She reached into her bag, broke a piece of the cornbread, and let it crumble into the waves. "For peace," she whispered. The ship pulled away, cutting through sunlight and memory.